Is Friday Read still a thing that people do on BookTube? Because I feel like this is something that only people on the literary fiction side of BookTube tend to do now. I like the idea of them. I think they work well for people, especially like me, who reads multiple books at the same time for a very long time. Like right now, I'm in the middle of 5 books and I've been reading all of them for probably over a month. So I thought that this would be the perfect opportunity to catch up with y'all and let y'all know what I'm reading and the fact that I am reading. I'm just not finishing anything. For those of you newbies here who don't know what Friday Reads is, it's essentially a video where on Friday you share with your audience what you are currently reading, what you're in the middle of, and what your weekend reading plans are. It's actually Thursday as I'm filming this, but it will be posted on Friday. I don't think I'll finish any of these books before tomorrow. Maybe I might, who knows, we'll see. So the first 2 books that I'm currently reading, I'm reading for Sci-Fi September, which is a month-long readathon that I'm hosting in September where we read sci-fi. I've honestly kind of fallen off, as most of the hosts have, but that's okay because I did say at the beginning that we're not going to be too hands-on as hosts, and we're just trying to encourage people to read science fiction in September. I have not completed a single science fiction book this month, but I'm trying. So the first of the 2 that I started is Journey to the Heart of the Abyss by London Shah. This is the second book in the Light the Abyss duology, and it's actually an arc. It doesn't come out until the end of October, and it was sent to me very kindly by the author in exchange for an honest review. I don't have much to say about it now because I'm only like 22 pages in, but what I can say is that I really, really loved the first book, The Light at the Bottom of the World. It's set in this futuristic underwater London. We're following this main character who has her own submarine, and she's trying to like outrun the government because it's like, you know, dystopian and whatnot. And she's also trying to outrun these like killer mermaids that are trying to get her. But she learns a little bit more about the mermaid society and the fact that they might not be the monsters that society is painting them out to be. So it's a really, really interesting sort of take at like what a futuristic underwater London might look like. I mean, it's not super realistic, right? It's more fun, and you kind of have to suspend your disbelief when you read it, but it's still a really fun series with a very interesting and immersive environment, and I highly recommend that you try out Light at the Bottom of the World. Oh no, it's gotten darker. Where's my light? Where's my light? Where's the glow? Where did the glow go? I had to grab a rag because the heat for the past couple days in this country has been merciless when I tell you. And you know what? I refuse to put the air conditioner on because I'm tired of unnecessary background noise in my videos. The next book I'm currently reading I mentioned in my last video, and that is New York 2140 by Kim Stanley Robinson. This baby is a behemoth. I'm about 150 pages in and it's over 600 pages long. It is set in a futuristic New York that has also become submerged, but in this case semi-submerged, so somewhat like a big Venice. All of these streets have now become canals, and that is of course due to climate change and the rise in sea levels. So this book falls into the category of what we would call cli-fi or climate fiction. The central conflict of the story has to do with all of these characters whose perspectives that we're following. We're talking about like maybe like 10 characters, and they all live in the same building, and their lives are very disconnected from each other, but they all eventually begin to merge because of an event that happens that begins to affect them all in different ways. There is a substance on the cover of my book, and I am very suspicious. That's sus. It's very scary because I mean, like, this is kind of a plausible reality. Like, you know, if we don't get our shit together with regards to climate change, you know, we could potentially see a future where coastlines and cities like New York become flooded. But at the same time, this book is not a super duper doom and gloom kind of apocalyptic climate change. It's more like, here's how humans can adapt to an environment like that. And so I think it gives a really interesting proposition on what the future could look like. And I really appreciate the way that Kim Stanley Robinson writes about that. There's this one character, an unnamed character, who's just called the Citizen, and they are there to kind of like explain to the reader, like, you know, what has happened, you know, throughout the history of time to get New York to the place that it's in today. And it's a really interesting history about, like, you know, climate change, about the melting of the polar ice caps and the rise in sea levels and how that happened and how that led to New York being flooded. And as I'm reading it, it almost felt like if I was reading like an article about something that actually did happen. And I think that was a little bit concerning for me. The next book I'm currently reading on my Kindle, and that is Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lo. This is a young adult novel set in 1950s San Francisco, following a young Chinese American girl from Chinatown. Essentially, it's following her as she's sort of like coming to terms with the fact that she is attracted to women and not quite sure how to make sense of that, especially within the historical and cultural context in which her story is taking place. I'm only 30% of the way through, but I'm loving this story so far. What I like the most about it actually is, again, the atmosphere. Like, it's a very immersive story. Melinda Lowe is writing a love letter to San Francisco, essentially. It's a very, very descriptive and interesting portrayal of San Francisco, and particularly Chinatown in this time period. I mean, I can't really speak to that with any amount of authority because I've never been to that city, especially like in the 1950s. And I'm also liking other aspects of the story as well, like the main character, she's very bookish, you know, she's confused about her sexuality. The last two books that I have to talk about are all about Muslims in the Caribbean. So the first one is called A Death in the Family by Ryan Shah. Ryan Shah is the author of A Silent Life, which was one of my favorite books of last year, if not my actual favorite book of last year, I think. Just like her previous novel, this one takes place in Guyana, and it follows an Indo-Guyanese Muslim family, particularly after the death of their father, and it's about how his adult children essentially are sort of reconciling with his death and reflecting on their relationships with him. Particularly what they're reconciling is their complicated feelings about him. The fact that he was a very patriarchal, staunch Muslim father who had a lot of rigid expectations for his children, which was a double-edged sword for all of them, because living up to his expectations came with a lot of consequences, but also not living up to his expectations came with consequences of its own as well. At the same time, however, he was also an incredible, loving father who cared deeply for his children, and they also care deeply about him. So it's a story about them kind of reflecting on the complexity of that, and I think it's something that could probably, you know, resonate with a lot of people who have lost their parents. Like, you know, not everybody had peaches and creams relationships with their parents, but also not everybody had a terrible toxic relationship with their parents either. So it's about how these people are sort of just ruminating on their relationship with their father. It's very I don't want to say stream of consciousness, but it's just them sort of like, we're in their minds a lot, they're meandering a lot, you know, between the past and the present, and thinking about, like, you know, what their relationship with their father meant to them, you know, what certain interactions they had with him meant to them, and all that kind of stuff. I would say that I kind of am a little bit bored with this one. It's not that it's a poorly written story, or it's not that it's bad in any way, it's just that it's not a very engaging story. Like, when I put it down, I'm not interested in picking it back up, which is why I have like only 40 pages left, and for the life of me I can't finish this book. But whilst I'm reading it, I actually find myself to be quite fascinated with these characters and their stories. A lot of it is resonating with me as somebody who is also, you know, an Indian Muslim from the Caribbean, you know, so there's a lot of cultural parallels that I see between, you know, some of my own family and what's happening in this book, and I just appreciate what this book is offering to the table. But I do think by the time that I finish it, and as I continue to reflect on it, it will become a book that I think about a lot, and a book that I continue to appreciate and look back on and reference. And finally, we have From Mecca, Globalizing the Muslim Caribbean by Alia Khan. So this is actually an academic text, and I'm reading this for school, obviously, so that's why there's all these tabs. It is basically a very comprehensive overview of the history of Islam in the Caribbean, as well as a look at contemporaneous Islam in the Caribbean. Why are these dogs so freaking noisy? God. Why y'all like dogs so much? This is why I prefer cats, okay? No, we stand. So Alia Khan is predominantly doing this through literary analysis. She's looking at a lot of like books and fiction and poetry, as well as songs from different Muslim Caribbean writers and creators, and non-Muslims as well, right? That reference Islam and that talk about Islam in the Caribbean. But she's also doing interviews and, you know, reading other books and sort of like synthesizing all of this data to really, as I said, give a comprehensive look at Caribbean Islam and its history. As most of y'all know, I'm doing my master's, and my thesis is focused on Caribbean Islam, so this is a very like key text for me, and I'm getting quite a lot out of it, as you can see by all the notes. So I do think it's a really good book if Islam in the Caribbean is something that you want to learn more about. I would definitely highly recommend that you pick this one up. I'm about 91 pages into it. So a little bit more than halfway through, almost halfway through, I guess. And there you have it. Those are the books that I'm currently reading. Hopefully I finish at least one or two of them this weekend. In the comments down below, I'd love to know if you have read any of these books, if you have any thoughts on them. What are you currently reading? Let me know. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely, lovely day, and until next time, inshallah, keep reading.